So, do you like your new house?
Christmas Eve, my grandfather smiled and asked me that.
Grandpa, I don't live here.
3 seconds later, a $400,000 family secret blew our perfect photo wall to pieces.
I walked into my father's new house, and the first thing I noticed was what wasn't on the walls. Me. He looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who didn't mess up your order. And for some reason, they suddenly wanted pictures.
Congrats on the house.
You ever watch someone raise a glass in celebration, only to realize they're toasting your life without you in it? That was my Christmas Eve. My grandfather stood beside a glowing fireplace, smiling proudly inside a house I'd never stepped foot in. He called it my home, a gift he'd bought for me years ago. But my father and stepmother were already living there, their laughter echoing off the walls, their photos smiling down at me like proof of a story I didn't remember writing. Every eye turned when I walked in, and for a split second, I thought I'd interrupted a secret meant to stay hidden. I walked into my father's new house with a bottle of red wine and a small embroidered handkerchief I'd saved up for. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed what wasn't there. No photo of me, just smiling portraits of Dad, Susan, and my younger brother Ben lined up perfectly on the walls like a family museum I didn't belong to. "Congratulations on the house," I said. Dad gave me a polite nod, the kind you give to a waiter after they refill your glass. That was our relationship in one gesture. For context, my name's Dorian. I'm 23. My mom Diana passed away when I was a baby. Dad remarried when I was 3. His new wife Susan had a warm voice but cold eyes. Together they had Ben, the future of the family. I became the reminder of a past nobody wanted to talk about. Growing up, the difference between us wasn't hidden, it was announced. Ben got the new bike, the gaming console, and the praise for trying. I got hand-me-downs, lectures about humility, and a tiny attic room that creaked every time I turned over in bed. Dad's favorite line, "Know your place, Dorian." When I finished high school, I asked about college. He said money was tight and Ben needs to be prioritized, so I started working night shifts at a supermarket, saving every dollar I could. My apartment was small, the walls cracked, but at least the space and silence belonged to me. Then months later, I got a text from Susan. "Come to the new house tonight. 6 p.m. be on time. No context, no explanation." Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the small, hopeful one, wanted to believe maybe things were changing. I brought the wine and the little handkerchief with Dad's initials. It wasn't much, but it was something personal. Something from me. Their new place looked like a magazine cover, stone steps, polished door, trimmed garden. When Susan opened it, she looked surprised I'd actually shown up. Inside, everyone was relaxed, laughing with neighbors about pool plans and home prices. Nobody asked what I'd been up to. Nobody even looked my way. I smiled anyway. Habit, I guess. After dinner, Susan called out cheerfully, "Dorian, stand closer to Ben. Let's take a family photo." Click, then another. And another. They never used to take pictures with me before. At the old house, it was as if I didn't exist. Now suddenly I was being placed in every frame like a decorative extra. Something about it didn't feel right. "Why all the pictures lately?" I asked once, trying to sound casual. Susan laughed lightly. "Oh, we're just capturing memories." "You're part of the family too, aren't you?" I smiled, but inside something twisted. I wasn't sure what was changing, but I knew it wasn't love. Still, I went to every new family dinner that followed. Thanksgiving, birthdays, holidays, same pattern. Small gifts from me, polite smiles from them, and photos where I stood at the edge pretending to belong. Every time, it felt more like rehearsal than reunion. Then came Christmas Eve. I'd just finished a shift at the store and was nursing a cup of cheap coffee in my apartment when my phone rang. It was Grandpa Will. He'd rarely called unless it was important. He lived in Chicago, busy running his construction company, but he always checked on me when he could. That night, his voice sounded brighter than usual. "Dorian, come over right now." "I'm at your new house." I froze. My new house? Before I could ask, he'd already hung up. I grabbed my coat and drove through the snow, my hands shaking the whole way. When Susan opened the door, her smile faltered.
"Oh, Dorian, you're—" She stopped mid-sentence. From inside I heard his voice. "Dorian, come in, my boy."
Grandpa stood in the living room, tall and proud, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. He hugged me, like always, tight, real, grounding. "This house," he said warmly, "is wonderful. Are you happy living here?" The air went still. Susan's hand froze on the wine bottle. Dad looked at the floor, and my heart started to race. "Grandpa," I said slowly, "I don't live here. I rent an apartment across town." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, the kind of silence that means something just broke. Grandpa's face changed. His joy drained into confusion, then into something colder. He looked at Dad, then back at me, then at the photos on the wall, the same ones where I stood at the edge like an actor in someone else's story. "Gregory," he said, his voice calm but sharp.
"Explain." Susan jumped in quickly. "It's just a misunderstanding. Dorian wanted to live on his own. He likes his independence."
But Grandpa didn't even turn toward her. He looked
Straight at Dad, and that was the moment I realized something. I never wanted to believe this new house
wasn't just another sign of
favoritism. It was a secret built on my name. That night,
Grandpa revealed why he'd really come, and what he said turned our family dinner into a confession none of us were ready for. If your grandparent discovered you'd been left out of something this big, would you walk away or make them face the truth? The fire crackled softly, but the room felt colder than the snow outside. Grandpa's question, "Gregory, explain," hung in the air like a verdict waiting to land. My father didn't look at him. He just stared into his glass, swirling the wine like it held a better answer. Susan spoke first, her voice polished but trembling. "Will, please."
"There's been a misunderstanding."
"Dorian's always been independent. He didn't want to live here." Grandpa turned toward her slowly. "Is that true, Dorian?" I shook my head.
"No, Grandpa. I didn't even know this house existed until tonight." The silence that followed felt endless.
You could hear the logs popping in the fire and the faint hum of the heating vents, like even the house was uncomfortable. Grandpa straightened his shoulders. "2 years ago," he began carefully, "I sent Gregory a transfer, $400,000.
I made it clear that it was for a 3-bedroom home. I wanted Dorian to have stability."
A place of his own. Susan's hand froze midair. Dad's grip on his glass tightened.
I could almost see the moment it cracked inside him. "You sent that money for me?"
I asked, my voice barely steady. Grandpa nodded.
"Yes, I thought you were living here."
"Every photo they sent showed you with the family, standing right there by that fireplace." He pointed at a framed picture on the
mantle, the one from Thanksgiving, where Susan had
called me over to smile next to Ben. The pieces snapped together like a cruel puzzle. The invitations, the forced dinners, the sudden obsession with family photos. They hadn't been reconnecting with me, they'd been maintaining a performance. Dad finally spoke, his tone cautious. "I thought it would be better this way. The house benefits everyone. Dorian's an adult, he doesn't need something this large. Ben needs space to grow." Grandpa's voice dropped low, calm but heavy. "You used the money meant for your son and built a lie on top of it. And you let me believe he was living here, content, supported." Susan stepped forward. "Well, please, Dorian never complained. He's always been fine on his own."
You thought wrong," Grandpa said.
He didn't need luxury. He needed honesty. For the first time I saw my father look small. Not angry, not powerful, just small. He set the glass down carefully as if he couldn't trust his hands anymore. "Dad," I said quietly, "I work night shifts to pay rent."
"I thought we didn't have enough money for school."
"You told me Ben's education came first." He didn't answer. I looked at Susan. Her eyes darted between us. desperate to hold the pieces together, but the story they'd built couldn't stand anymore. Grandpa let out a slow breath. "Dorian, gather your things. You're coming with me to Chicago. We'll make this right." Then he turned to my father. "And as for you, Gregory, we'll discuss this properly tomorrow." Susan's voice cracked.
Please, Will, don't do this.
"We're family." Grandpa looked at her, then at me. "Family is built on truth, not on paperwork and pictures." I didn't say a word.
I didn't need to.
The truth was louder than anything I could have shouted. Outside, the cold hit like a wall, but I didn't feel it. I walked beside Grandpa to his car, the snow crunching under my shoes, the lights from the house glowing behind us like the end of an old chapter. He opened the door for me, his voice softer now. "You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. We'll start over." As we drove away, I looked back once. Through the frosted window, I could still see them standing in the doorway, Dad silent, Susan trembling. The perfect picture finally cracked, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt seen. I didn't know it yet, but leaving that night wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of everything my father never wanted me to discover. The next morning in Chicago, Grandpa told me the full truth about what he'd been sending for years and how much more had quietly disappeared. If you found out your parents weren't honest about something, this life-changing, would you forgive them or cut them off completely? The flight to Chicago felt unreal. One night, I was standing outside a house I was never meant to lose, and the next, I was flying toward a life I never imagined I could have. Grandpa didn't talk much during the trip. He just kept looking out the window, his jaw tight, his mind somewhere between anger and disbelief. I think he was afraid that if he spoke too soon, the truth would sound worse than it already did. When we landed, the air felt sharper. Cleaner, his driver, James, greeted us by name and led us to a sleek black SUV that looked like it belonged in another world. And as we drove through the city, past glass towers, frozen rivers, and streets pulsing with light, I realized how far I'd been living from what my mother's family had built. Grandpa's home wasn't a house, it was a landmark. 3 stories of stone and oak, with wide staircases and windows that looked like they belonged in an old film. When the front doors opened, the scent of pine and polished wood filled the air. "Welcome home, Dorian," Grandpa said softly.
For real this time. I wanted to speak, but my voice wouldn't cooperate. My whole life had been defined by being tolerated, never welcomed. And suddenly,
here was this man, my mother's father, opening his entire world like it was waiting for me all along. That night, over dinner, he finally broke the silence. His tone wasn't angry anymore, just steady. "Dorian," he said, "there's more you need to know." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were years of financial records, bank transfers, school fund allocations, and yearly allowances he'd sent to my father after Mom passed away. "Every cent," Grandpa said, "was meant for you, for your schooling, your clothes, your future." I assumed Gregory was taking care of things. But when you told me you were working night shifts,
I knew. I flipped through the papers, my chest tightening with every line I read. My father had been receiving support from Grandpa for nearly 2 decades, money that could have paid for my education, my home, even the basic things I went without. Instead,
he'd used it all to build a life for the family he started after Mom. "He didn't just keep the house," I said quietly. "He kept my future." Grandpa's eyes softened.
"And yet you still showed up to every dinner, every holiday. You didn't harden, Dorian."
"That matters." I looked down at my hands,
unsure how to respond. All I could think about was every night I'd spent trying to prove myself to a man who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. "I wanted to make him proud," I said. "I thought if I worked hard enough, he'd finally see me." Grandpa leaned forward.
"You don't need his approval to have worth. Your mother never did either. She built her life from nothing before I ever helped her." The words hit me harder than I expected. Because for the first time,
I realized I didn't just lose money, I'd lost a story I was supposed to inherit. The truth wasn't only about the stolen gift.
it was about the years of silence that kept me from knowing who I really came from. That night, I walked through the mansion's quiet halls, my footsteps echoing against marble floors. Every detail, the paintings, the family photos, the sound of the city outside felt like it belonged to another version of me, one I hadn't met yet. When I reached my new room, there was a framed photo on the desk, my mom, Diana, smiling in front of an unfinished building site. The same construction site where Grandpa said she used to visit him as a kid. Below it, in Grandpa's handwriting, a note, for the dreams she started and for the grandson who will finish them. I sat on the edge of the bed, the kind of quiet filling the room that doesn't hurt, it heals. But deep inside,
I knew this story wasn't done, because for everything Grandpa had given back,
there was still something I hadn't faced yet, the question of what to do about my father. The next morning, Grandpa asked me one question that would decide how far I was willing to go for justice and whether forgiveness still had a place in my story. I thought I was done with Ohio, until Grandpa's plan forced me to confront everything I'd tried to leave behind. The morning light in Chicago was soft and golden, but it didn't warm me. Grandpa was already dressed, standing by the window of his study when I came down for breakfast. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "Dorian, what do you want to do about the house?" I froze mid-step. He'd asked it like a simple question, but it wasn't. It was the line between peace and war. I sat across from him, watching sunlight streak across his desk.
"You said the house was bought in my name. It was supposed to be," Grandpa said.
But Gregory registered it under his. "I have the paperwork ready. We can transfer ownership, or..." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp, but kind. "We can pursue legal correction quietly." Legal correction, a safe phrase for something that sounded a lot like I'm making him face what he'd done. I didn't answer.
Immediately, part of me wanted to walk away to start over.
Here in Chicago and leave everything behind, but another part of me couldn't stop replaying every night I'd spent in that attic while my
Father built a new life with money meant for me. I
don't want to destroy him, I said finally. But I can't pretend it didn't happen either, Grandpa nodded.
You don't have to destroy him, Dorian.
You just have to reclaim what was yours. That sentence stayed with me the whole flight back to Ohio. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. And somehow, that felt different. When I arrived at Hollow Creek, the air smelled of snow and distant smoke. The once pristine yard was unkempt, the mailbox leaning sideways. It didn't look like the glossy house from those family photos. It looked tired. Susan opened the door. Her perfect composure from before was gone. Her eyes were puffy, and she clutched a mug like it was holding her together. "Dorian," she said softly. "You came?" "I did," I replied. "We need to talk." She stepped aside without another word. Inside, the fireplace was unlit, the walls bare where pictures once hung. Dad was sitting on the couch, shoulders slumped, staring at nothing. He looked smaller than I remembered. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the file on Grandpa's desk, years of support money, scholarship funds all redirected into this house. "I'm not here to fight," I said quietly. "But I know the truth now, about the money, about the house, about everything." Dad's eyes flickered up, and for a second I saw something raw. Shame, maybe. He nodded once.
I know, I waited for more, an apology, an explanation, anything, but silence settled again, heavy and absolute. Susan whispered, "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just made choices." "Choices," I repeated.
"You mean pretending this was my home while sending Grandpa photos to keep him believing his grandson was happy?" Dad winced, but didn't deny it. "I thought I was protecting what was left of the family," he said. "After your mother, everything fell apart."
"I didn't know how to raise you without resenting what I lost." The words hit like stones. He wasn't cruel, just weak, and weakness I realized can wound just as deeply. I'm transferring the house, Dad said finally. Your grandfather called. I signed the paperwork. It's yours. The words should have felt like victory, but they didn't, because no document could give back the years I'd lost, wanting a father who was never truly there. I took a slow breath. Keep it, I said quietly. You'll need it more than I do. Dad looked up, startled. I don't want a house built on lies, I said.
I want a life built on truth. I turned toward the door. The air outside was sharp and cold, but it felt clean, like a page turning. Susan's voice followed me faintly.
Dorian, will you ever forgive us?
I paused, not looking back. Maybe, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. When I reached the car, Grandpa's driver nodded, ready to take me home. I exhaled, my breath fogging the glass, the house fading behind me. It was over, or at least it should have been. But a week later, an envelope arrived at Grandpa's estate. No return address.
My name written in my father's handwriting, and inside it, something that made my hands tremble all over again. Inside the envelope wasn't just a letter.
There was a folded document that suggested my father's
lies went deeper than even Grandpa had. Realized what I read in that letter didn't just rewrite my family history, it changed what I thought. I knew about my mother's death. It arrived.
A week after I'd walked away. Plain white envelope. No return address, just my name written in my father's familiar, almost nervous handwriting. For hours, I didn't open it. I just kept staring at it on the desk, wondering what else he could possibly have to say. Was it an apology? A plea? A final attempt to clear his conscience? When I finally tore it open, a folded stack of papers slid out, and the first line stopped my breath cold. Your mother never knew about the account. The letter wasn't an apology, it was a confession. Dad wrote that after Mom died, he was left with her life insurance, but the payout came with a condition. Half of it was to be managed under Grandpa's supervision for my future. He admitted that instead of telling Grandpa, he opened a second account in his own name and quietly rerouted the money over the years. I told myself it was for stability, he wrote, but the truth is, I didn't want to raise you alone. Every decision after that came from fear and pride. My stomach turned as I read the next line. The first payment from your grandfather wasn't for the house. It was meant to restore what I took. So the $400,000 Grandpa sent wasn't generosity. It was redemption money he'd been giving to my father, believing it was helping me recover what Mom left behind. And instead of rebuilding what was lost, my father built a second life. The house, the photos, the illusion of a happy family. All of it funded by a lie that started before I was old enough to spell my own name. I could barely see the words through the blur in my eyes. But I kept reading. Near the end, his handwriting wavered. I don't expect forgiveness, but you deserve the truth. Your mother trusted me with everything.
I failed her and you.
The rest of what she left is in the safe. The last line was just an address, the name of a small storage facility in town. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about legacy, about what Mom might have tried to protect from the start. Grandpa came into the room, his brow furrowed. What's wrong, son? I handed him the papers. He read them quietly, his face tightening as he reached the final paragraph. That safe, he said under his breath, was supposed to hold your mother's personal files, her designs,
her investments, her will drafts. He looked up.
Dorian, if this letter's true, your father didn't just hide money. He might have erased your mother's entire voice. My chest tightened.
You think her will's in there?
Grandpa nodded. If it survived, it could change everything. Not just the inheritance, her story. We left within the hour. The drive back to Ohio was silent, except for the hum of tires over frozen asphalt. Every mile closer, the memories came flooding back: the attic, the dinners, the walls that had never held a single photo of Mom. When we reached the storage facility, snow was falling again. The air was thick with that same quiet from Christmas Eve, the kind that always comes before something breaks. Inside, the clerk handed us a key after verifying Grandpa's signature on the paperwork. Unit 117. It smelled like dust, metal, and memory. There, against the back wall, was an old grey safe, the kind you see in movies, heavy and deliberate, built to protect more than valuables. My hands shook as Grandpa spun the dial. It clicked open with a groan. Inside were 2 folders, a small wooden box, and a sealed envelope with my mother's handwriting on it. My knees nearly gave out after all these years. There it was, her voice, waiting in the dark. I picked up the envelope. On the front, it said, "For Dorian, when he's ready to know the truth." The next moment, Grandpa whispered, "Do you want me to read it with you?" But I couldn't answer, because something in me already knew this letter wasn't just about love. It was about betrayal. If you found a letter from someone you lost, one that could change everything you believed, would you open it right away or wait until you were ready? The envelope trembled in my hands. Her handwriting was the same as I remembered from the old birthday cards Grandpa used to save. Elegant,
Calm, deliberate. For a moment I just held it, afraid that once I opened it,
there'd be no going back to the version of my life I thought I understood. Grandpa sat beside me in the quiet storage office, the air cold enough to make our breath visible. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. This moment belonged to her and to me. I finally tore the seal open. A single sheet of paper, folded twice, weighted inside. The first line hit me like a whisper, straight from the past. "My dearest Dorian."
if you're reading this, I didn't get to tell you everything I wanted. My throat tightened. I kept reading.
Every sentence pulling me deeper into the world she'd left behind. "You were my reason for staying strong when things fell apart. I trusted your father once.
I believed he'd protect you.
But love and grief change people in ways we can't predict." She went on to explain that before she passed, she'd begun building a small real estate investment with Grandpa, 3 properties, meant to secure my future. She'd kept the ownership under her name to ensure I'd inherit them once I turned 18, but after her death, my father quietly transferred them into his account, citing simplified management. If he tells you he did it for safety, maybe he even believes that. But Dorian, don't let comfort ever replace
Honesty. The world can take almost anything from you, but never give it.
permission to take your integrity. Tears blurred the words. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was grief. Grief for all the years I'd
Lived not knowing that my mother had tried to.
protect me from exactly what happened. Near the end, her tone softened again. "Don't grow bitter, my love. Grow wise. You'll meet people who love loudly, but live carelessly. Forgive when you can, but walk away when you must. And if you ever feel small, remember, the smallest seed can still grow through concrete." The last line was written differently, bolder, almost trembling, as if she wrote it through pain. "When you build your life,
Build it on truth, not inheritance. I folded the letter back carefully.
My hands shaking, Grandpa placed his hand over mine. Steady and warm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lost, I felt anchored. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and quiet, the same way it had that Christmas Eve. Only this time, it didn't feel cold, it felt like closure. Over the next few weeks, Grandpa helped me sort through everything. The properties my father had claimed were legally restored in my name, and with Grandpa's guidance, I decided to create something new, a small foundation in my mother's name to provide housing for single parents starting over. When the papers were signed, Grandpa smiled. Your mother would have been proud, not because of the money, but because you turned pain into purpose. That night, I stood by the fireplace in his Chicago home, the same way he'd stood in my father's that Christmas night. Except this time, the house really did feel like mine. I looked at her framed photo on the mantel,
her smile gentle as ever. I get it now, Mom, I whispered. You didn't want me to inherit wealth.
You wanted me to inherit strength, and for the first time, I finally felt like her son, not someone forgotten in the corner of family photos, but someone who had stepped out of them and built a story of his own. Sometimes, the truth doesn't take everything from you. It gives you back the part you didn't know you'd lost. If your parent left behind one letter that could heal or reopen every wound, would you read it right away or hold on to it until you were strong enough?